Planning board is now in session. Good evening, everyone. Karina.
Good evening. First off, for tonight, I'd like to introduce our new recording secretary, Kathleen Battles. She's a resident from Lattisquama, and she's come to help us capture the meeting through the minutes, process them so that we have a good record of everything going forward. So, welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Did you get all that down?
I've got it down.
First item on the agenda is an A&R, approval not required, 26 Granuel Road. I'll ask the town planner to give us the background on this.
On January 18th, Waterman Design Associates, the engineer surveyors representing Mr. Paul Ware, who is owner of the estate of the property, submitted an A&R application to create 2 new lots and a remaining lot at 26 Granuel Road. The A&R was received and filed on January 18th. As you can see on the screen, there is an existing house, pretty old house. I believe you've gone to Historic Commission to discuss that. And there's also a barn and a shed on the lower right side of the plan, which is proposed to be raised. So those are the 2 new lots. With the remaining lot, you'll see symbols for wetlands. That's what that is on the back lot there. I reviewed the plan. It seems to meet all the requirements of an A&R for frontage. And although it's not required for an A&R, the lot area is also sufficient for the lots that were created. The deed references are all accurate to the best of my knowledge that I checked. The appropriate language is on the plan, and that's what I have. Time for action on this is the planning board needs to act by February 8th.
Very good. Good evening. Could you grab a microphone, introduce yourself, and take us through the A&R?
Okay. Well, Corinna said it very well. Probably going to hear a lot of the repetition here, but I am Nate Bouts here on behalf of WDA Design Group and on behalf of the client, Paul Ware. Presenting the A&R for 26 Granuel Road. The existing property is approximately 15 acres, zoned in Residence A, with frontage along Granuel Road, Brigham Road, and Main Street. Of the 15-acre piece of property, approximately half the land is wetland, as marked with the symbols on the plan. The parcel is mapped as Parcel 16 on Assessor's Map 50. It is located to the south of Main Street and to the west of 495. We're proposing to subdivide the lot into 3 lots labeled Lot 1, Lot 2, and remaining land of Ware. The existing site contains a 6-bedroom house, gravel driveway, barn, and shed. Each lot has adequate frontage and area required by the Southborough zoning bylaw on a way, as defined by Section 81P, Section 41 of the Massachusetts General Laws and the Southborough Rules and Regulations. Lot 1 is proposed to be 1.02 acres with 100 feet of frontage. Lot 2 is proposed to be 1.25 acres with 100 feet of frontage. The remaining land is 12.7 acres with frontage along Granuel, Brigham, and Main Street. The existing house is to remain, and the barn and shed are to be raised, called out on the plan. And I would now like to open up the floor to any questions from the board. Thank you.
I believe you said 100 feet of frontage.
Oh, 150 feet of frontage for both lots.
Okay.
My apologies.
For 1 and 2, and the other one has much
Yes,
more frontage.
Much more, yep.
Okay, thanks. I'll open it up to Mr. Mills.
I have no questions.
Mr. Jenks?
I've reviewed the plan and it looks fine to me, so no questions.
Mr. Stein?
No questions.
Mrs. Luttrell?
No questions.
Do you want me to say a couple words about what's required for an A&R?
Back to Mr. Jenks.
Just for anybody who isn't aware, A&R is a provision in the subdivision law that says if you meet certain requirements with the plan, A&R, approval not required, and it means approval under the subdivision law. The requirements are few and pretty easy. They're frontage, and that's the most important requirement, and access to the lot for emergency vehicles. If you meet those two things, you are entitled to an A&R approval. The planning board cannot deny it. It does not speak to any other zoning requirement. So we in signing the A&R plan, do not certify anything about whether it's got the right acreage, whether there's wetlands that prevent you from putting a house with a proper setback. None of the other zoning things are we speaking about. Only that you can divide the property this way, mainly because each remaining lot has frontage, the required frontage, so.
And I have no questions or comments. Anyone from the public? Seeing none, Mr. Mills.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the A&R for the estate of Mary L. Ware for 26 Granule Road, Assessors Map 50, Parcel 16, as presented and dated 1/7/2019.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? So we'll sign that, and will he come back tomorrow to get it?
If that works for you?
Sure.
All right,
Yep.
we'll sign it at the end of the meeting, and then I'll call you tomorrow.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Next item on the agenda is a discussion item for 144 and 154 Turnpike Road, site plan non-compliance. Ask the town planner to update us on this item. Karina?
Okay, let me just update this. A couple months ago, I got some information regarding 154 and 144 Turnpike Road, which is also known as White's Corner. You can see on the screen, 154 is in the direct northwest corner with some businesses, etc. That was permitted. The site was permitted several years ago, and I believe back in August of 2017, 144 Turnpike Road was purchased by the same owner, which is Mr. DePietri, under particular entities for those projects, for those properties. What was found was that there is a driveway connection between 154 and 144. If you look on the screen, I circled the area right here. What is an apparent driveway? It consists of pavers. I have a photo of it as well. Let me just bring that up. So as you see on the screen, I'm looking to the northwest, and in front of you is 154. I'm standing in the parking lot of 144, and there's a pavered section there. So I looked back at the approvals for that property number 144, and one of the conditions is that there's not to be any access to Breakneck Hill Road from that property, which this apparently allows. 154 was permitted, let me just look here, I don't have it off the top of my head. Back in the early 2000s, 154 was permitted as well. And part of that whole process was there was a parking developed underneath the building. So there's a parking garage under the building. Let me just go back. Here. So under 154, there is a parking garage that's accessed through this ramp in the southeast corner. So there were some other conditions during the permitting of this, but the main reason we're here tonight is because I sent a letter to Mr. DePietri letting him know that that was in non-compliance of the site plan approval, and asked that he attend this meeting this evening so he could explain how it got to this point. So that's where we are, and he is here to present, yes.
Thank you. Did you want to come up, Bill?
Sure.
Explain what's going on here?
Nothing going on. You guys have questions, I'm here to answer them.
Need the mic. Good evening.
Good evening.
You're on.
I'm here to answer questions. Karina asked me to show up. She said you guys had some questions, so there's nothing to present.
Okay, so I'll just give a little bit more information. So in June of 1996, when Charles Gaffney was chairman of the planning board, there was a site plan approval for this project, and the vote to approve was made with the following condition, and the condition is there will be no access of any type from the site onto Breakneck Hill Road. So that being said, the new pavers that are there appear to allow vehicles to travel through there, which then allow them to access to Breakneck Hill.
Well, the main access drive, it goes on the Route 9. That goes to Breakneck Hill Road also. It says direct access. Direct access would be from 144's property on the Breakneck Hill Road. There is no direct access. So in our opinion, we're in conformity with the decision that was written in June of '96.
Oh, so you're saying right here?
I was at the meetings and that was approved. There was an access over there.
Oh, there
That's
was
what
an
they were
existing
talking
one
about.
there.
Right.
Okay. And that's why we're hoping you can explain.
Yep.
Because you were there at the
Yep.
meeting, so if, what your intent is and how you feel that this was appropriate, if you can just clarify it, then the
Nothing,
board
we
can
just,
discuss it.
we are trying to make it easier for people within the buildings to go back and forth, and if they want to go on Route 9 west, not having to travel a mile and a half down there, wait for 2 signals to come back to go the same direction. It's called ease of traffic flow. And I've not seen any issues with it backing up or anything else to date. If it becomes an issue, then we'll close it off, or we'll hash off some of the parking spaces. It was also for overflow parking for 154 onto 144.
So, the access drive from 154 to Breakneck Hill is here, is that a right turn only out of the
There's
property,
a
right?
sign there, it says right turn only,
Okay,
right on that island there. I'm not saying everyone follows it.
right, but there's a sign
there
that
is a
was
sign there,
required
yep.
as part of the
Yep.
conditioning. Okay, and there's no access from the easterly property 132 other than pedestrian
Pedestrian.
access, right? If you want, I can put the plan up on the screen too, if it's more descriptive, the landscape.
that one?
I do. So, I can speak to the other concern is that the changes that the pavers caused is probably the reduction in the landscaping and possibly parking spaces. So that may be of concern for the approval.
No, actually, it was done to increase parking spaces. 144 has more parking spaces than is required under zoning. 154 has enough, but on weekends it gets busy. So we created the connection so it could overflow onto the 144 section. 144 has 5 spaces per 1,000. It's only required 3.5 per 1,000.
That's the one, right?
And the pavers are pervious and not impervious.
And just for everyone's information, this is the corner of the property we're talking about.
Correct.
So this is Route 9 down here, and this is Breakneck Hill Road on the right hand, on the westerly side. And this, so it's this corner right here.
Yep.
So basically, the site plan,
Which, 144 or 154?
right,
And that's the first set.
so this is
This is 144.
144. So the approved site plan for 144, is that what I'm looking at here?
That's 144. I have
Right.
154 on the screen.
Okay. The approved site plan for that shows no connection.
No.
And landscaping. So you went ahead and changed what was approved.
Well, nowhere does it say I can't have a connection between two properties that I own.
Well, I think it could be interpreted, Bill, that if you have an approved site plan that shows no connection with landscaping, then that's what was built, that's the way it's got to be unless you come in and request a modification.
I would disagree. If we're over the landscape requirements and I choose to take out some landscaping, then that's my own prerogative. If I'm under the landscape requirement and I take out landscaping, then I do agree with you.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach.
Well, that's, I mean, that's my opinion. You guys have your opinion.
You may remember that I was on the board at the time of these approvals also,
Yes. Yeah.
and there was great concern about that connection because the neighbors were concerned about the volume of traffic that would be taking a left and going up onto Breakneck Hill Road, Mount Vickery, and off into those neighborhoods all the way to Ashland.
All right, so let me ask you a question. I want to stay on this topic, because if you're in that office building and you want to head to all those streets you talked about, do you think they're not going to go out Route 9, take a right on Woodland, and end up where they want to be anyway?
That's about the best, and I think you touched on it earlier, that if you wanted to go to Westboro on Route 9, you still had to go to the Fayetteville Lights. And if you remember the traffic studies, it indicated that that was capable of handling that traffic and not putting the traffic into the residential
No,
neighborhoods.
I'm talking about, you said Ashland, Mount Vickery, Breakneck Hill Road. If you're going to go to those roads, you're not going to go up the Fayetteville Lights. You're going to go on Route 9, take a right on Woodland, and end up exactly where you just said, on all the side roads. So they get in there anyway, Donnie. You're just making them make a longer route.
Well, I can just tell you that when this plan was approved, it was looked at with the neighbors,
I'm not
public
disputing that.
safety. It was built according to the plan, and then just recently, I think it was in October, September, it was changed with no notice, no request. And if you need to change a site plan, the proponent would come into to the planning department and fill out an application for a modification to an approved site plan.
I
And
don't
then we
think it's
just go
required.
through the process.
In my mind, I talked with council, and we did not feel it was required.
I'll open it up to the rest of the board and then to the public. Mr. Mills?
So, looking at the January 7th, 2003 site plan approval with conditions. Number,
One,
it's listed as D.
well,
Add a 6-foot PVC fence with earth tone along the entire southern perimeter of the 154 lot.
you, want which approval you want, 144 or 154?
154.
Okay, sorry.
So, 154, I mean, that, I don't see the fence in any of the pictures. That was a condition for the approval. And if that fence were actually there, which was one of the conditions, you couldn't do this.
I don't know why it wasn't put up. There is some fencing over there.
So I guess this calls into question,
Well, I can just move it. I'll move it to the other side.
that I think then we go back to the question of the approved site plan.
No, I would just move it to the eastern side of 154. Yep.
So you do agree, though, that that fence was never put in?
There is some fence here. Whether it was put along the entire southern portion, I'm not sure what it shows on the plan and what they were referring to. Some fence is out there, I will tell you that. That doesn't go along the entire southern property line.
Okay. So that was the only follow-up I had for that piece. But I agree that, you know, it does appear that there was a modification done to the two plans.
Bill, could you just, where do you think there's fencing? Is the fencing along here?
Right along there.
Right here,
It is there and it turns the corner a little bit.
here, because I
Yeah.
didn't see anything along here.
No, no, it's probably
right here.
2 lengths there and maybe 2 or 3 lengths on the, coming from Breakneck Hill Road heading east.
Like a corner
Yep,
here.
correct.
Okay, because I didn't see anything along the other part.
No,
And this is where it was supposed to be? Along
I've
this-
not read what Mr. Mills has. I don't know what the plan calls for either. You'd have to refer to the plan as well.
Okay, from 2003, it just, one of those conditions was a 6-inch PVC fence, earth tone along the entire southern perimeter of 154. So that would be this, right?
Yep.
If you,
6 inch or
according to
6
the
foot?
condition. Oh, I'm sorry,
No,
can I
I-
say 6?
Well, I don't know. I was
6
wondering
foot.
what it said.
It says 6-foot PVC fence.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the stretch it was intended to be, I believe, according to that condition.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the site plan shows.
Let's see, I got it right here. See right here, proposed PVC fence system. I'm just not sure
It doesn't show it all the way.
where the line type is. It's hard to tell
Yeah,
on the
it
screen.
actually, where it is on that plan is where it is in the field. It basically makes an L.
You're saying right here?
Yep, kind of where your hand is there, it goes up south and then it heads east a little bit. Probably to about there. Wouldn't be the first time there's a conflict between plans and conditions.
Mr. Jenks?
Hey, Bill.
I felt.
At the site plan approval for 144, do you remember why the town wanted that clause about no exit onto Breakneck?
I don't, I mean, I didn't attend every single, every meeting they had. I don't really recall, to tell you the truth.
It says there will be no access of any type from the site onto Breakneck Hill Road. it seems to me the of any type would, a little bit ambiguous maybe, but would refer to a concern of traffic coming out of the lot, taking a left, even though there's a sign there that says right. I don't remember that sign, come to think of it, but
It's right on that, if you're leaving 154, where that tree is, right on that right hand, right there.
yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah, I don't,
I mean, I don't,
remember seeing it, but
look, it's there. I think most local people just ignore it.
yep, it's, I think everybody's got their favorite signs to ignore.
Oh, I hear you, I hear you.
Have we looked at the record
There it
of
is.
that hearing?
The meeting,
The
Oh.
1996 file? Have we looked at that to see if there's any clarification in there as to why the town didn't want cars going out to Breakneck Hill?
I haven't looked in great detail, but it was my understanding there was a traffic study done at the time, and there was concern of the that Breakneck Hill Road was not the type of road that could handle the additional traffic. It was curvy and hilly and not wide enough, et cetera.
Yeah, I think Mr. DePietri makes a good argument that the cars are gonna find their way to go up Breakneck Hill Road if that's where they need to be. And it is, I think it's coming down to a unfortunate wording, perhaps it could have multiple interpretations. So if we could find some background of the discussion that went into that,
Condition?
condition. that-
Okay. I
that
did
may
pull all
help.
the files. I have a stack in my office already to go through them for that.
I think that's probably where we're gonna end up. I'm through.
Mr. Stein?
So, Karina, we haven't requested or received anything from town council on this matter, have we?
No,
Okay.
we have not.
So this is an informal discussion.
Yep. I didn't bring my attorney.
Right, I noticed that, and we don't have ours either, so it's really just a philosophical discussion
No,
almost at this point.
I hear you, Jesse, I
So-
hear you.
This is almost like, you know, what is a site plan, and what does it mean to have an approved site plan, and what does it mean to make changes on an approved site plan after the fact, and whether or not it's just okay to make a judgment call. And I think, you know, sitting here as a planning board member, based on my experience on this board and my view of the planning board's role in the town, I do feel that the approved site plan really should be adhered to. And that if we go down the road of just making these type of judgment calls and spot decisions, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. So as part of the planning group, I personally feel an approved site plan actually should be adhered to, and that this would constitute a modification. And I feel that you probably should have gone through the board to make any physical changes of this nature on an approved plan. I certainly understand where you're coming from. I understand your position, but for the town as a whole, we really need to protect the site plan role and the site plan process.
I hear what you're saying. I would call it's an unusual situation where I own both properties, two separate site plan filings. I don't think it's, you know, if it was a separate owner that you combine the two, I think would be a different story. That's just my opinion, and that's my counsel. That was kind of his take on it. You know, if that was Tamboni still owned that, and we made the connection, I think you guys would probably be 1,000% right. But whereas it's the same owner, he felt we were okay.
Yeah. I mean,
And I know you guys are busy. I hate coming before you all the time. Bogging down the meetings and taking up time.
yeah. So I guess hearing you say that, I understand what you're saying, but I just disagree.
No, look,
I guess when you get into
you're entitled to
egress into a local road,
Yeah.
and it's in direct contradiction to the approval, I don't see any way around it. I think that this calls for a formal modification request.
Mrs. Luttrell.
Good evening. First, I'd like to disclose that several years ago, I filed an appeal for the zoning board of appeal decision in which Mr. DePietri was the proponent. I've filed a disclosure with the town clerk, and this does not affect my objectivity at all, and I can view this situation fairly. Secondly, Bill, we always love to see you, so never be afraid to come before us. I agree with Mr. Stein. I think it's clear. It says any change in parking or reduction of landscape requires a modification of the site plan before the planning board, 17410H. Also, the site plan approval for 144, which is the office building, has the condition that Mr. Jenks was referring to. There shall be no access of any type from the site onto Breakneck Hill Road. And I think that's pretty clear. That provides access from that site onto Breakneck Hill Road.
I hear you. I think it's ambiguous at best.
I disagree.
Well, I know. That's
Additionally, it's very dangerous.
what's dangerous.
Cars come flying through there. There are cars parked. So cars coming through from the office building can't see if there's someone in that parking lot at 154. I almost got my front end chopped off today through there, and there was another car coming the other way, and this car just came flying right through. They can't see because there are cars parked there.
What do you mean flying? They're in a parking lot.
Well, they came whipping around the corner and through there.
I don't know. I mean, we've been watching it to see the reaction to the traffic on the Breakneck Hill Road and Route 9 and whatnot. So look, they're going normal parking lot speed. It isn't like it's a road.
It's not a road, but you don't need to be hit at 60 miles an hour in a parking lot to wreck your car.
Maybe I don't think anyone's going 60 miles an hour in that parking lot.
No, but
Well, you just said 60. I don't, maybe 6.
no, well, definitely not 6. But regardless, I think that it requires a modification of the site plan.
I'll just go back and restate that I was on the planning board in 1996 when this was going on, and my memory is that there was considerable concern by the neighbors about this connection. And we know that by taking a left, it accesses probably hundreds of homes on narrow streets. There was discussion with the fire chief, police chief about this, but the biggest concern was from the neighbors, if I remember correctly. And that's how the condition got placed in as part of the approval. And I see in the room some of the neighbors that were here back in 1996. So I guess I'll open it up to the public. If anybody wants to speak, ask questions, or make comments. Yes, sir. You need to come to a microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Butler, 4 Davis Road. Yeah, I also attended some of the hearings on the 144 site plan when you were there, Mr. Morris, and my recollection is the same. I would say also that it's worth noting that the equivalence that Mr. DePietri attempted to draw between making a left turn on Breakneck Hill Road and making a right turn on Woodland Road is false, because Woodland Road is wide enough to have a line down the middle. It essentially does not have the line of sight problems and the severe narrowness that Breakneck Hill Road has, which is why, one of the reasons why the concern was there about Breakneck Hill Road, but wouldn't exist in that same form with regard to Woodland Road. So I do think that making left turns is a problem, but in my view, the number one safety problem, I think there are two safety problems that are posed by this, if I may. This whole overall situation we have here. One, and I think the most severe safety problem, in my view, is that the inadequate parking on 154, which is not being met adequately by the under-building parking, because the under-building parking is not substantively being used. That inadequate parking, which is not only on weekends, because I have photographed that Breakneck Hill Road on a Tuesday in April, when it was parked all the way from the junction of Mount Vickery down to the entrance to the 154 property, parked all along there, along Breakneck Hill Road. And to my way of thinking, this is just my personal opinion, is that nighttime parking, it was nighttime because of the restaurant usage, nighttime parking along Breakneck Hill Road is the number one hazard that we're dealing with here. And so I don't have answers here, I'm just characterizing the situation, and Mr. DePietri is opening up of this to my way of thinking. Again, this doesn't speak to your concern about should he come before you asking for a change, but one issue in my view is that the most dangerous thing is nighttime parking along Breakneck Hill, along the eastbound side of Breakneck Hill Road, because traffic coming towards Route 9, headed north on Breakneck Hill Road, is not expecting people to be getting out of cars and that very narrow passage there to walk down along the outside of cars to get into 154. And I went there on the 24th of April of 18, found it parked all the way along there. I was going to the Ola restaurant, I photographed the situation and sent it to the building inspector. My impression at the time was that the under-building parking was supposed to be open to the public, and it was not, and that was my concern. But I believe that it may be that it only was supposed to be, as a condition of approval of 154, was only supposed to be open to employees. But it's not essentially being used. It isn't providing the kind of relief that was anticipated by the planning board when 154 was approved. So as a result, without the opening to the 144 lot, we have people parking along, we have had, before that opening was put in, people parking on Breakneck Hill Road, and I think it's extremely hazardous to pedestrians, and I think that's the number one concern. The number two concern is traffic coming from 144, making a left turn on Breakneck Hill Road, which is too dangerous a road to handle the increased volume of traffic, which was the original concern at the time of the approval for 144. To my view, those are the issues we have here. The under-building parking is supposed to be open to employees at 154, but I believe that many employees at 154 are not utilizing it. They are in fact parking in the lot because it's more convenient. They arrive at non-peak hours. At peak hours, employees are already on the job and their cars are there, and the under-building lot is substantially empty. So that's the lay of the, in my view, in my opinion, that's the lay of the land that we have here. So I do think that the number one concern is not to have parking on Breakneck Hill Road, particularly at night when the restaurants are active and the parking pressure is highest, because it's extremely hazardous. I would even think that if there was continued pressure, if anything that was happened resulted in continued parking pressure on Breakneck Hill Road, investigating putting no parking signs there that should be considered with the police department, because it's extremely dangerous. It was a rainy night when I was there and photographed it, and it was just it's a pedestrian accident waiting to happen. So, thank you.
Mr. Butler, hold on a second.
Yes.
You took the, you observed that in April,
Yes.
which is before this connection was made.
That's correct.
So your issue isn't the connection or the additional cars going out onto,
That's my second issue. I think, I'm not a traffic expert or a policeman or any of these things, but in my view, the number one, there are two safety hazards. The most severe one is if, in the event that there is parking on Breakneck Hill Road. I think that, particularly given that one of the highest pressure times comes at night when the restaurants are filling up. And there's no line of sight. People come whipping around from the intersection with Mount Vickery there, and if they park alone there, somebody's gonna get mowed down, you know. And number two is that Breakneck Hill Road, the number two safety concern, these fight with one another. I'd be first, you know, right, because the number one is being relieved by the pass-through, but the pass-through puts too much traffic onto Breakneck Hill Road, which if it went down Woodland, at least Woodland is a wide enough road. I mean, no one really wants it, but it's at least a wide enough road. Breakneck Hill Road is an extremely hazardous road with twists and turns and bumps, and you can't see anything. It's just a very dangerous road to take any more traffic. So I think there are two safety concerns, the one and the two. I would put them in that order, in my opinion.
thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Keys?
Hal Keese, 6 Mount Vickery Road. I'm one of the neighbors who was here back in 1996 and before. And at the time when 144 was built, 154 was actually White's Corner Restaurant at the time yet, okay? Mr. Morris, I think, is right that we as the neighbors fought very strongly to prevent 144 from connecting to Breakneck Hill Road in any way, okay? And so in my mind, the statement that Mr. Jenks thought was kind of, I believe, I don't put words in his mouth, he thought was kind of ambiguous, is not ambiguous. There will be no access of any type from the site onto Breakneck Hill Road. And by putting this connection in, there clearly is an access now. And our concern was very much the traffic issue of putting all the cars, many of the cars from 144 out onto Breakneck Hill Road. And as Mr. Butler said, those who might be turning left up there, it's a very dangerous road, and for those of you who may not know, there's a real sharp curve in there that cars go flying around, and sometimes coming the other direction, they don't make the curve. They end up in the woods, okay? We fought very strongly against this because we did not want that to happen because of the traffic. By putting this connection in, and I think, I have no traffic studies, but I think it has clearly changed the dynamics of that intersection. For those of you who use that intersection, it's becoming more and more difficult to get access to it. There are times when traffic jams up from the lights at Route 9 up to the intersection to Mount Vickery, and it starts to go up Breakneck Hill Road, waiting to cross that. And by adding more cars to it has clearly changed the dynamics, and no traffic study was done on it. And in addition, at the same time that many of the cars from 144 would be trying to get out, make a right turn on Breakneck Hills Road so they can make a left turn onto Route 9 to go west on that road. There's also the daycare center across the street. I'm not sure which number that is, but it's on the other side of Breakneck Hill Road, where parents are coming in to pick up their children, and they all trying to access Breakneck Hill Road also to get back out to the traffic lights. So again, just from observation, I believe many of them, because it's so very difficult to try to make a left turn, because there's so much traffic trying to get out there, they will make a right turn, come Breakneck Hill Road, go down Mount Vickery, down to Route 85, then take Route 85 back to the intersection with Route 9 so they can head west or whichever way they want to go on Route 9. So I think there's been a very clear change in the dynamics of that intersection because of this opening. I think I didn't know anything about this connection, but I noticed that more and more traffic was jamming up there. So in my mind, this is not an ambiguous statement at all. It says there will be no access of any type. All right, and again, in my mind, if if this can occur, then what is the function of the planning board? If someone can say, I don't like what the planning board has decided, I'll do what I want, then why do you make decisions? Why does anybody come to you and put in requests like this? So those are my comments. Thank you.
Anyone else? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Paul Dyer, live at 17 Breakneck Hill Road. I also was here at the hearings. I remember, Mr. Morris, you were trying to save trees on the site that didn't make it. The one victory that we got out of this development was not emptying the traffic onto Mount Vickery. We thought we were against the state at that time. They wanted Route 9 to run as free as it could. The studies were done. Oak Hill Road intersection was going to handle that. The idea of turning left onto Breakneck Hill Road takes you down to an unimproved road, a narrow road, like everyone has said. It's narrow, it's hard, the hairpin turns and so forth. If you take a right out of 144, you get onto Woodland Road. Like you said, it's a lined road, easy access. It's been improved enough to handle the traffic. Coming out left and going down Mount Vickery to 85, that's just another hazard. So this was a concern of the neighbors, but also concern for the people driving those cars. We don't want accidents in front of our house. We live right at the intersection, the T of Mount Vickery and Breakneck Hill Road. We watch these cars fly in and fly out. I believe at the time 154 was being improved or being changed. There was condition there to improve the sight lines all the way up to that intersection of Mount Vickery and Breakneck Hill. That being said, that's never happened. The question that I'd like to pose, though, is 154. Taking those parking spaces out in a site that's already lacking adequate parking. If it was lacking parking originally and it's busier now than it was before, has a ratio changed? Those spaces right there are critical to making 154 a functional and compliance site. That underground parking, I don't think I've seen anyone park in there for years, because if we did, the wall in our bedroom would light up at night. The headlights coming out on that ramp illuminate our room. Okay? I haven't seen that happen for years. So I understand that someone wants to build a pathway through from one side to another, but this is more or less doing what you want and asking for forgiveness later. That's not how it's supposed to happen. We came to you for your help. We asked you for your help years ago, and we got it. We fought hard to keep Breakneck Hill Road safe and not to stand in the way of development, but just please, if anything can be done to keep that intersection, close off that passageway between the two sites, I think it needs to be done. If there's going to be some side discussion saying, well, it's for pedestrians only, put permanent bollards in there. But I think the parking study alone in 154 will squash this entrance. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Sebu Agababian. I live actually around the corner on 18 Breakneck Hill Road. And I've got several concerns. Some of them my neighbors have brought up already, but already coming out of my driveway around the corner with the existing traffic was bad enough. Now with the increased traffic, I'm even more concerned about safety of me and my wife driving out of that driveway, because we are exactly on the corner, and our driveway, when we are coming out, has less visibility by the cars, and cars sometimes have speed that is not very safe to drive in that narrow road. So increase of the traffic is definitely going to impact us directly, probably more than any other neighbor in that area. And And again, I heard about some technicalities that the language or whatever said direct access to Breakneck Hill Road. I wasn't here that long ago. I'm relatively newer neighbor there. I've been there since 2010, almost 10 years now. But logically, I would say that's technicality. You know, if initially it was planned and thought that it is safe to keep the original plan the way it was thought and decided, so we have to stick to that. You know, there's no way around that. That's why we have rules in the town. That's why everybody trusts those rules. You know, when we get permission to have our house or whatever within certain rules, we stick to those rules. We don't change the rules middle of the way just because of any reasons, because it's not right. Decision has been made for some good reasons, some good considerations, and it is disheartening that any resident of the town would permit themselves to just do something that is not acceptable. So again, it's my concern. We talked about turning left, turning right, and safety issues. One other safety issue that I can think of that I didn't hear, because I don't want to repeat everything else that that everybody else mentioned about the concerns they have. When we have more, even cars turning right from the parking, 154 parking into Breakneck Hill Road, trying to get to Route 9, it is more and more visible that people try to pass red lights. And when there is more traffic, that tendency seems to be going higher because people had waited for one traffic light change and now it is almost changing and now it is red and they still continue going. That's a nice safety hazard. That I've seen a lot of people driving through red light in that traffic area. So these are my main concerns that from my personal observation. I drive to Boston every day, so I go through that route during the hours of morning and return in the evening, so during the working days. So these are my personal observations, my concerns, and you know what I believe something that's lawful should be respected and maintained that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Barbara Dyer. I live at 17 Breakneck Hill Road, right on the corner. And we've been there 25 years, and we've seen a lot of changes. We appreciate some of them, and others we don't appreciate, which is this. Taking a left is a safety hazard, as everybody else has said. Also, I'm a walker, so when I'm on that street walking my dogs, I'm almost hit every single day. So the smart thing for me would be not to walk my dogs on that street and pile them in the car and go elsewhere. Okay, but what we keep having is I just try to walk down Mount Vickery Street. Over the years, it has changed. It has changed extensively where we're almost getting hit. Our dogs are almost getting hit, people are almost getting hit, cars are almost hitting each other, okay? Whether or not this is a direct impact from this, okay, is time will tell. But I leave at 6:30 a.m., okay, and the cars are already backed up to the intersection where we are, and just trying to back out to get to Route 9 is a disaster, okay, as Sabu said. Okay, so then I take a left, and I'm caught 2 or 3 lights now. That never used to be. So there have been changes. Okay, again, the impact taking a left and a right onto Breakneck Hill has significantly impacted our community. So I ask you to do the right thing, which is follow the rules. Thank you.
Yes, Sam. Yep.
Sam Stivers, 7 Presidential Drive. Sorry I'm a little late here. I didn't know if you talked about the ZBA action relative to this. But I was on the ZBA when the original use variance was granted for this particular site. And that decision language is somewhere around, and I'm sure we could find that. But this was a big issue in terms of the Breakneck Hill Road traffic. And the deal that was made there was abundantly clear that no traffic was to go to Breakneck Hill Road off of that site. And in fact, the applicant's attorney wrote the conditions for that, including the language that specified that. So I would refer you to that decision. And again, part of the deal to get the use variance for the additional building there was to listen to the neighbors' concerns about traffic on Breakneck Hill Road and prohibit traffic from the site from getting onto Breakneck Hill. That was zoning board, so it's obviously different from planning board, but I think that intent was perfectly clear at the time before the planning board got involved. Thank you.
We do have the ZBA file here. I think our position initially has been that that single condition, condition number 1 from 1996 was sufficient, and that unless there was somewhere else a higher document that would conflict with that or negate it, that was sufficient to have this discussion and bring it to the attention of the zoning enforcement officer, which we've done. We have a new zoning enforcement officer, and the town planner has had a discussion with her, but she's the new zoning enforcement officer is getting caught up and hasn't addressed this in writing yet. Yeah, that one's different. Yeah.
Sam was talking about specifically for 154.
Sam, were you talking specifically about 154? Because what we have here is the 122.
Now known as 132, 136.
And then it also known as 132 and 136. You remember the progression of these office buildings
Right.
being built?
Right.
Was that what you were referring to?
I actually don't remember off the top of my head the one that the ZBA approved the use variance for, but it did involve property along Breakneck Hill Road there. There was some property that was, a conservation restriction was applied to it. And again, the idea was that part of the trade-off was to essentially keep traffic from the office complex off of Breakneck Hill Road. That was the clear understanding, at least I believe, on the part of the zoning board. When
That was
decision
134 Turnpike Road. Sam wasn't on the board when 144 was done.
And I believe that property had access to, didn't have access, but fronted Breakneck Hill Road.
Correct. 134.
134 did right here on this plan.
Well, right now, our focus is on these two buildings and that one connection. Yes, John, if you want to go back.
So I'm not sure how this is going to roll forward from this date. Oh, John Butler, 4 Davis Road. I'm not sure how this is going to roll forward from this date, and it may be premature to make this suggestion, but maybe it's not a bad idea to have it percolating. There might be, to my way of thinking, as I've said, and Mr. DePietri said, there's a parking adequacy problem on 154. We don't want to ignore that problem. The possibility might exist, whether this would be acceptable to any parties, I don't know, of in effect taking a portion of the parking lot for 144, which is, as Mr. DePietri observed, larger than it needs to be for at least for the zoning requirements, and isolating that in some way with some fence or barrier so that it was extra parking for 154, but did not permit a pass-through for all the cars from 144 onto Breakneck Hill Road. And I don't expect, anybody to jump up and say, let's do that, but on the other hand, I thought putting an idea forward that, to my way of thinking, we can't ignore the practical problem of the inadequate parking on 154 that Mr. DePietri significantly wanted to address with this. But on the other hand, the problem we have is all the cars of 144 making left turns on Breakneck Hill Road. So I will just leave that there, hanging in the air as a possible resolution of these two. If in the fullness of time it appears to be of merit to anyone, great.
Thank you. Anyone else? So I think it's, again, this was a discussion item, and thank you for coming in on this. I think you've heard from the board and the neighbors. So there's several things that you could do. One would be nothing and leave it the way it is and be subjected to the town looking into future actions to either make it changed back or move in the direction of putting it out for a revision. You can agree tonight or think about it tonight and say that you'll close it off until you'll come in for and fill out an application for a modification. So you can respond any way you want, Bill, tonight because it's a discussion item. But I believe, based on what the town planner has told me with her discussions with the building inspector, that the zoning enforcement officer will review this, and if she determines that it's an area of non-compliance, and if the board takes a formal action and states that it's in non-compliance and requires a modification, then we would notify you, the board would notify you, and perhaps the zoning enforcement officer would notify you in writing of what your, what the town's position is and what your possible remedies are.
Yep. I'll wait till I hear from you. We're in a disagreement.
So your position is that in the meantime, then you'll leave it open?
Correct.
Anything else from the board? Very good. We'll move on to our next agenda item.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for coming in.
No problem.
Next item on the agenda is Chestnut Meadow subdivision bond estimate and agreement and open space lots.
I'm ready.
Karina,
All right.
Chestnut Meadow.
This item is for Chestnut Meadow subdivision, which is currently in construction phase. Back in November, we asked the town consultant Fuss & O'Neill to perform an inspection in order to come up with an initial bond estimate for work that has to be still completed. Fuss & O'Neill prepared an estimate. It was provided to town council for review, who had some suggestions and some revisions required. Part of the process is also to have a bond agreement, a performance bond agreement, which ensures that should something happen to the developer or the builder building the future public roadway or the infrastructure, that the work is covered so that the town is protected. The bond estimate and also the bond agreement was given to town council. The bond agreement had some minor changes. We needed to add an inflation rate. So a couple meetings ago, I had given you a bond estimate. That one is now superseded with the new one in your packet, which is dated January 25th. Fuss and O'Neill estimated a cost of $410,800 for the completion of Dairy Farm Lane, which is the new roadway in Chestnut Meadow subdivision. It was originally $395, but according to the bylaw, it required an inflation. And since the bond agreement is for 2 years, the original covenant that was approved here was a 3-year covenant, but a year has gone by. So in order to align the end of the covenant with the performance bond, it's a 2-year bond. Therefore, it's 2 years of inflation. I don't know if that's confusing, but that's what happened. With us tonight is Mr. George Gallagher with Habitat Communities, who is here to present a final draft of the bond agreement. Again, that was reviewed by town council. You can just take one and pass it down. In your package was a version that had been reviewed by town council but not finalized with the total bond amount of $410,000. So the document that you're getting handed out right now is basically the finished document with a power of attorney and Philadelphia Indemnity Insurance Company being the bondholder, which this bond still requires, I think, one final signature, right?
Bruce's, yeah, Bruce Wheeler's.
Bruce Wheeler, who's the trustee of...
Chestnut.
Okay. Okay. So the proponent, Mr. Gallagher, is here tonight to hopefully get this subdivision performance bond accepted by the planning board.
And this has been reviewed by town council?
Yes, the one in your packet, which, let me just take a peek.
So one that ends with 028?
Yeah, the one
No.
in your packet is dated January 17th. Oh, sorry. The one in your packet is dated January 17th, 2019, and it reflects the bond amount of $395,000. But it does in the first paragraph. In the third paragraph, it did already make the changes for 2-year period.
The one you just handed out is the 410.
Yes, this one we received this afternoon, just prior to the meeting, and it's the updated with the 410. Town council did review the revised bond estimate with the inflation value, which came to $410,800, and he said, town council said, I'll just tell you, in a letter dated January 25th, we have reviewed the revised bond in conjunction with the applicant's emails. Please be advised that the bond with clarifications is in acceptable legal form for submittal. So the only difference, I believe, and you can correct me, George, is if the total value of the bond in the final draft is now $410,800 to include the inflation value for 2 years.
Right, that's the only change.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Any more?
There was one other thing I had on the agenda item was discussion about the open space lots. And,
Let's do this.
but I just want to tell you, that's off the table for tonight.
Okay.
The engineer and Mr. Gallagher indicated that they're not ready to address that at this time.
Okay. Well, based on your review and discussions and that of town council, which says it's good to go, I'm good with it. Mr. Mills?
Yeah, I have no questions.
Mr. Jenks?
I'm ready with it.
Mr. Stein?
I have no questions.
Mrs. Luttrell?
Wasn't there a question on the length of time? Was it 1 year and now it's 2? Is that what the?
That's correct. When we got the original draft, it was just for a one-year term.
Okay.
And there was a question that if it's not renewable, it would put the town at a higher risk, because I would have to monitor the work and make sure that at the end of the year, before the bond lapses, what was completed and if another bond would be required at that time. So I spoke with town council, and he opined back that it would be preferential to have the bond extended for 2 years, which ends at the same time the covenant does, protecting the town, because you're required to have the construction done within the covenant timeframe, which was 3 years, starting in April of 2018. Right, so the covenant would go 2018, 2019, 2020. This bond, starting now in April, finishes out the last 2 years with that
Oh,
covenant.
okay, I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. George?
I'm good.
Okay. Mr. Mills? So the motion would be to approve the subdivision performance bond as written in the amount of $410,800? Is that what you expect?
Yes.
So moved.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? 5-0. We will pass that along to,
Do you have to re-accept the bond at
we
this
we
amount?
included that in the
Motion.
in the motion,
Okay.
that it's for 410,000. But you're still owing us a signature.
Correct, on the original bond. I think that just came in today.
We're expecting a signature on the performance bond in the amount of $410,800, dated January 25th, 2019.
Correct.
Okay.
All right?
Very good.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Mr. Mills?
Motion for a 2-minute recess?
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? We'll see you in a couple minutes. Planning Board is back in session. The next item on the agenda is a discussion item of the Mooney Ball Field and Richardson Tennis Court lighting projects. It's my understanding that the technical merits of the project are not to be discussed because it's not a public hearing, but we're here for more of an administrative discussion. So, I guess I'll start with the town planner. This discussion item was requested by the Recreation Commission. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Yeah, on December 12th, you received a memo that I was copied on through an email. The Recreation Commission is requesting a meeting with the Planning Board to discuss the Mooney Field and Richardson Court at Neary light projects, as discussed and written in the March 31st, 2014 Planning Board minutes, and as promised at the 2018 Annual Town Meeting. Do you want me to read the whole request? So what I did is I spoke with Doreen and Karen to see what day would be best for them to get in front of the Planning Board for a discussion item, and tonight was the better option, so you could gather everybody up and get here. Originally, Doreen had submitted an application for major site plan approval for both the Mooney Ball Field and also the tennis courts at the Neary School on Richardson, the Richardson Court lights. Back in 2017, I think when I first started, we sat down and we talked about all the different things you need, and I drafted a memo saying these are the kind of things you should include in the application. So then, mid-year, you came forward and submitted a application formally, and I went through it, and there were some things missing. And I was using a prior project, like Choate Field, being new here as a precedence to see what was required there, so I kind of aligned it with that. And in looking at it, one of the things that was most important was the site plan itself. We needed a site plan that would be stamped by either a landscape architect or a professional engineer or land surveyor, which basically would show existing conditions, your proposed improvements for the lights, and the peripheral features that come along with those lights. So following that, I think you came back with another submission on, hold on, I'll tell you, late summer of 2018, and you had provided most of the documents that are required. There were some small things, we needed the abutters list straightened out, et cetera, but a site plan was submitted that I think was prepared by the EIT that works for the DPW on a part-time basis, and it was more of a schematic, and in looking at that, I drafted another memo in response, just to reemphasize the importance of the site plan requirements for the project, for safety and for acknowledging that the project is constructible as laid out in the schematic. So in doing that, after that, I believe, well, I do know that the DPW took the application back to further decide on what to do with the approach. And that's when the Recreation Commission asked for a meeting in front of the Planning Board to go over, what's going on, and let's get on the same page. So here we are.
Very good. Good evening. Thanks for coming.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You summarized my comments perfectly.
Thanks.
But
Feel
anyway,
free to re-summarize.
My name's David Nixon, and I'm actually the junior member, even though I'm a senior, of the commission. We're basically here tonight to answer any questions you might have and to get your views and recommendations on both the Mooney ball field and the Richardson Court lights. Tonight we have with us Doreen Ferguson, who's the Director of Southborough Recreation, Karen Galligan, DPW Superintendent, David Fialco, who's the Vice President of Southborough Youth Baseball, and Mike Barry with Musco Lighting. They can handle any specific questions regarding those areas of the projects, and they may have some questions for you folks also regarding procedures and how we can just move everything forward and be on the same page. So I think at this point, what I would do is turn it over to Karen to see if, you want to
Summarize the project, maybe?
summarize the
if-
project.
if-
Also, I think one of our major questions that we have, because we've been made to understand that you actually require a major site plan review, which seems to be a little departure from what we understood prior to tonight. And in terms of what the specific requirements are that would cause the need for a major site plan review. So I think that's an area that we'd like to be enlightened on and determine if in fact that's what we really have to do.
So, again, this is listed on our publicly posted agenda as a discussion item.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's appropriate, I can be overruled by the board certainly, to discuss the merits or the technical details of the project, whether the lights are bright enough, if there's enough lights. I don't think it's appropriate for us to discuss that, because that's the type of thing that's discussed and reviewed in the public hearing. The other part that you mentioned, which is the need for a major site plan and the defects in the materials that you've submitted, I think we're free to discuss those so that you can get the project site plans and documents in order so that the planning department can determine and declare that the submittal is complete.
Right, as I
So,
said,
again,
we're
not-
here to cooperate.
Not to talk about the details of the technical details of the projects, but to talk about the administrative pieces. Let me ask the board if they agree with that.
That's in line with what I'm thinking.
Agree.
So, Mr. Chairman, how are we to go, I mean, the outgrowth of this discussion is either going to be a site plan formal hearing process, or they do it the way they want to do it, one of those two paths. So I'm wondering how we're going to arrive at that decision without delving into some of the technical aspects. Because really what we need to do is just ascertain whether or not the formal modification, because this isn't the site plan's already been done for the original site plan. What you're really talking about is a modification hearing, in my opinion. No?
I don't think there was ever a formal site plan for those fields.
Oh, is that right?
No more than I don't think there was ever a site plan for the parking lot behind this building.
Okay, so
You
it
know,
predates.
there was a time when, if the
I
town,
did not know that.
if it was a town project, they just went ahead and did it. And then over time, the neighbors would say, well, how can the town just go ahead and do that? And then, discussions with selectmen and others said that the town will go through the site plan process, same as anyone else, out of respect for the neighbors.
So, can you think, since you've been on the board longer than me, Can you think of any other examples of sites that predated the site plan review and approval process where there was a significant modification, such as erection of a light tower or something like that, that either did or did not warrant a, I guess in this case it would be an actual site plan, you know, a full site plan review and approval?
Well, I guess I'll answer it this way, Jesse, that when, for example, the Trotter School was built in started in 95, that went through full site plan and full conservation, just like any other project in town. And so that was over 20 years ago. So at least since then, you know, the town projects, I mean, that was a big project, but town projects have come in. I mean, St. Mark's, Fay School, they come in with different projects. There's a similar one that we went through with a site plan with St. Mark's on their playing fields. Recently, right across the street at Fay School, on their dorms. So, and even more recently, the new lights at Choate Field, that went through full site plan. And I think from what we saw an hour or so ago, you know, we were referring back to documents in 1996, and the neighbors were here, and it's, you know, the site plan is really supposed to be a tool that protects the proponent as much as it protects the neighbors in the town. You should, to me, you should be wanting to do it, because once the project is approved, you've got it all there.
Yeah.
So, back to your original question, I guess I agree with the concept of having this discussion without delving into the technical aspects of the project. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Mrs. Luttrell?
Agree.
I'll go-
Agree on the technical process.
I'll go back, there's a meeting minutes from the planning board back in 2014, and it was the Mooney Field lights. And in it, part of the notes was both Mr. Semino and Mrs. Bartolini, those were former planning board members, agreed that they did not think that this proposal required a full submittal, but it does need a public hearing to ensure that residents are allowed to voice their concerns. And I think we've shared that with the commission over the years. A full submittal would be, you know, the requirement for lid. If you've looked at the code for site plan, requires lid, which is lower impact development submittal, special permit. But because of the nature of the project, I think the board would say you don't need to do that. It doesn't have that much of an impact, if at any, on changing the environment or the drainage. Same thing with landscaping. These lighting projects, at least from what we could see, wouldn't trigger any landscaping. So that's what was meant when it did not, proposal did not require a full submittal, but it does need a public hearing. So this goes back to 2014. The public hearing, of course, would be the major site plan. So if you want to talk about, you've got 2 or more memos from the town planner, which list in detail the deficiencies or omissions in what we have for materials. And we can go over those if you'd like. One of the main things that was a concern as far back as 2014 was the single person or company, corporation that has responsibility for the design and the construction. And again, as we saw an hour or so ago, we had one person in here to address 2 site plans and all those drawings and conditions. So you can go to one person, and that person that was here tonight probably never installed a piece of curbing or shoveled a piece of dirt, but he is responsible. He was listed as the responsible entity for those projects. So that's what's needed for all site plans. Someone, a person or an entity that the board, the town, can go to if there's an issue and be responsible for all aspects of the project. We don't have that. And to me, that's a showstopper.
Mr. Chairman, may I enter into discussion and ask a couple of questions and offer some points of view? My name is David Fialco. I'm the Vice President of the Southborough Little League. The 12 and under boys and girls of this town are really looking forward to getting these lights that were granted a variance by the Zoning Board of Appeals and funded by town meeting and I've had an opportunity to look at the history of this project, including when it went to the ZBA, and many of the concerns from the planning board meeting back in 2014 are addressed in the ZBA's granting of the variance, and those include substantial limitations on the use of the lights, including that they won't be used past 9 p.m. on weekdays and past 9:30 p.m. on weeknights, that they will have an automatic shut-off feature that will turn off the lights.
We're starting to get into the details.
Well, but I think it's relevant.
What we want to talk about is the requirement to do site plan, major site plan, and the submittal materials, the plans, the specs, how it's all fully coordinated with a person or entity that is fully responsible for all aspects of the project.
I understand your concerns, and I guess then I'll get to some of my questions. I think that the history is somewhat important, but as I read, and forgive me, I'm an attorney. I practice law in Boston. I live on 10 Lyman Street. I've had a chance to look at the site plan approval, but my experience with the planning board or ZBA or anything like that is minimal. So I'm at an incredible disadvantage to the years of wisdom and experience on this board. But as I read the site plan review rules, section 174, section 10, the procedure is to encourage a desirable and compatible character. And it goes on, the requirements of this section shall be applicable to the following. And it lists five different categories. 3 of them are completely immaterial to this discussion. And the other 2 aren't really that far behind them. One is any non-residential development that results in an increase in on-site parking, which there is no increase in on-site parking at the baseball fields, or a change in use or reactivation of a facility that has not been used for a period of 2 years. Again, there's no change of use.
Do you recall the discussions that we've had on this in public?
I don't. I was not
Those items have been discussed, and the board has given an opinion that there is an increase in parking. It doesn't say an increase in parking spaces. It says an increase in parking. So if you have a daytime game, parking spaces are full, then you have a nighttime game, you've got double the car trips, double the parking.
Under that explanation,
As
if we
far as-
decided to play games at 6 a.m., there would be an increase in parking, but I'm not sure that that's really the intention there.
And as far as the, I think it was the change in use, the board, I think, expressed its opinion that the use has changed, in that the fields are intended to be used during the day, and now they're being used in the evening.
Respectfully,
changed.
fields are being used to play baseball, and we're talking about lighting fields for 12-year-old use. I just, those were my questions. I appreciate
These were
the
discussed
answers.
before, but I'll let you continue, but I see I have a question. Mrs. Luttrell.
I just wanted to mention, before we go back and forth on the quibble about these details, At town meeting, when these were approved, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth. They were approved narrowly, and the one thing that was made clear was that the Recreation Commission would come before the Planning Board for site plan for these projects. It was made clear for each one, also the basketball courts was the other one. So I'm very confused why now you're pushing back on that when you promised town meeting that that Planning Board would have full review of these projects. And as a town entity, I would think that you would want it done right. You would want all the abutters to be invited to come before a hearing and, you know, air their concerns, as many of them did at town meeting. I'm confused as to why you would be pushing back on this.
Well, as I said, I'm the newest member of the commission, so I can't speak to what took place at that time, because I wasn't on the commission. But I can assure you, we're here tonight not to circumvent any procedures or to do anything in any way that would be undermining normal procedures. We're here to gather additional information and to provide information. That's basically why we're here. And, you know, we're hopeful that when we leave, we know firmly exactly what the board requires, why they require it, and we'll do what's necessary. But there's been no intent or just absolutely no attempt to go back on anything that's been discussed in the past. I was not privy to that. I don't know what understandings were reached and by whom, but we're here to basically clear the air now and see what we have to do.
Can I just comment?
Yeah.
You gotta get the mic, Doreen.
And just not to get over technical, at town meeting, it was asked if we would come before the planning board, so that's what we're doing. I don't recall them saying that we had to do a major site plan review on the floor at town meeting. Could be, just want to say, that's what was said, that we would come before you.
I watched it again last night because my memory isn't always great.
Same here.
So I watched it last night, and it was very clear that the chairman of the Recreation Commission at the time, Mr. Schifrin, said that the commission would go before the planning board for, you know, a full review, as they do, of all lights. And it was asked several times, I think, by our select person, Mrs. Faniff, also, if they would go before the planning board for a hearing, not a discussion where no neighbors are at.
Isn't there a presentation made to the neighbors?
Yes, we have met with the neighbors.
I believe that there was a meeting with the neighbors.
So let's stay with the site plan issue. Is it agreed that you'll go through site plan?
If that's what you require,
Yes.
you know, it's, if that's what you require, that's it.
Okay, good. So now we can go to the memos from the town planner who reviewed the submittal materials, and we can, if you'd like, we can go through them and see if there's any misunderstanding as to what needs to be done to make the submittals complete and accurate. If you, again, the site plan is the plan that you're going to build. It's not a concept plan.
Right.
It's the plan that shows all the features of what the project will consist of and where they'll be, how they will be built, and then referenced to who is responsible for the whole project.
So can you explain what you mean by reference to who's responsible? Because we have had these discussions that we do have an electrical engineer on board who stamped his electrical plans, and I understand they're not a site plan, I get that. Electrical plan did stamp the site plan that was for Choate, and that seemed to be okay at the time, so I don't know why that wouldn't be okay now. So I do want to make sure I understand that. But that electrical engineer is in charge of the project. They're running the project, they're running the contractor. We've bid the contractor. The contractor's obviously in charge of doing the work. However, the electrical engineer is going to be inspecting the work as far as making sure it's all built to plan. You know, the affidavits will be coming through as they normally would based on, you know, any other project that was done. So I just, you know, it's basically there's no town entity doing the work. And I know that was a concern. And originally when the building inspector talked to me about the project, and he was saying, he's like, he said originally he didn't think it went to major site plan, that it was just something that we needed to have a discussion. And when I talked to you in the downstairs before, Mr. Morris, we had talked about, you said, well, we want to make sure that, you know, there's somebody who's in charge of it, and we do. It's our electrical engineering company, the design guys. So I don't have, or we don't have a civil person right now on, like, to do the work. We haven't hired anybody for that. Choate was basically, we took the site plan that existed, and the electrical engineer put his information on it, and then stamped it and signed it. And if that's what you're looking for, that's a lot different than a full-on site plan with, you know,
So,
2-foot contours
Karen-
or any of that, which wouldn't seem would be necessary.
So does the town intend to put this out in more than one contract? You know, one contract for the electrical guy, another one for the civil work,
Right, but
maybe another one for the...
overall, so the overall GC, I want to say, but it's not technically a GC, is the electrical engineer.
But will it be a
He's
single
running the
contract?
project. So we have a contract with him already. Then we bid his spec. I have a contract with that person to build it. This is not any different than we would have with many other contracts, many other projects. And then we're purchasing the lighting system, which includes the foundations, from a vendor,
Who's we? The town?
the town.
I think that's where we're getting hung up, because you have a contract with an electrical design engineer.
Yes.
So if the lights come and they get installed and they don't work, bulbs don't work, whatever they are, the LEDs don't work, is the designer, and we go to the design engineer and say the lights don't work, or there's a problem with them, is he going to say, I'll fix it, or is he going to say, that's not mine, that's the light manufacturer?
He's in charge of coordinating and GCing the entire project.
But
So his contract is to actually design and then run the construction project, do the inspections, just like we have our water guys. We have our engineer who designs our water system, and they come out and they do all the inspections, they do all the work related to that, except they're not physically putting in, I have a contract that's separate for the person putting in the water main. So this is that same exact idea. I buy the pipe from someone, we contract guys to work at prevailing wage to do their project, but the engineer who designed the project is in charge of coordinating and doing all the project management, including making sure everything's done on site, and they're the person I call when I have an issue and, you know, the water pipe's leaking, it wasn't installed right. They take charge and handle that, and that's what my contract with the electrical engineer is.
do you have that in writing?
I have a contract with the electrical engineer.
Does it say what you just said, though?
It says that they're in charge of the construction and inspection,
But are they responsible?
yes,
Does it say that?
yes.
That's what we need. If you can show that to us, that'll be, depending on the language. You understand what we need. You need,
Well, the thing that, it's not a problem, yes, we have it, but I just don't, we didn't do that at Choate with the electrical engineer. And that one was not in charge, it didn't have any of those responsibilities. All those responsibilities actually fell on the town in that project. And that was not something that was questioned, and usually, you know, you've never asked us for a contract before. It's fine, we have it in place this time, but it's just, if that's what you're looking for in order to have that no site plan, like, I just need to know, if I give you that, and then is the actual 2-foot contour site plan with, you know, all the other information, like a full-on surveyed, because I don't have a full-on surveyed of either of these two properties. That's just not anything we have. So I either have to get that. Okay. That's what I'm trying to figure out from you. Or are you just saying, oh, if the electrical guy's in charge of it, then, and we see the contract, then we're good?
Mr. Jenks.
Good evening. You mentioned the electrical guy several times, so I know that discipline is involved. Can you tell me without detail what other disciplines are involved, engineering disciplines?
So there aren't anymore. It's an electrical contract. So well, that's not true, because the foundation design is done, and so there's obviously a structural guy involved.
So think about the work to be done, not the contract that you've got in place. What disciplines, are you moving earth around? Are you doing anything with foundation work, civil work? You doing anything chemical? I mean, what are the disciplines?
So obviously, we're digging a trench,
Yeah.
and we're drilling a hole for a foundation.
And
we have a structural engineer who has to come out and check that as
Okay.
part of the structural, but
Okay,
he's
good.
also, he's responsible to give that report to the electrical engineer.
Okay, so is that it? Structural and electrical?
Yes. There's nothing else that's actually happening on that project. It's 4 light poles, well, as far as Mooney goes, 4 light poles. I think there's 4 Trotter also, so
Okay.
8 light poles total, trenches, and then we're coming off of the National Grid's poles, so that's their, you know, their work as far as National Grid has to get us the service, and then that's it.
Okay, tell me you're not having the electrical engineer stamp plans for the structural work.
They're not, they've already been stamped, and it's through a structural engineer.
Okay.
So you have a copy of those, and that's not an electrical stamp on those.
But the electrical engineer is going to take responsibility for the whole project.
Yes, he's gonna manage the project from start to finish. He's responsible to make sure all the parts are in place and got there correctly. So the structural person will do the structural affidavit, because that's who has to do it. Obviously, you're not gonna have an electrical, you're not gonna have me do it, you're not gonna have anybody else do it, you're not gonna have a civil guy do it, you're gonna have a structural guy do it. So he's gonna do that. He's gonna make sure, the electrical guy's gonna make sure we get it, and then it all comes into a package back to the town. That this is all set, and then the building inspector gets that.
So in a year, the poles are tilted because the foundation settled or something.
Right, it's back on the electrical engineer to go to the structural guy. It's between them. Our contract's with the electrical guy, but the thing is he's gonna go and say, all right, what is the reasoning for this? And if they were actually tilted and there was a problem, it comes down to that the poles are the same exact as we have anywhere else. There's a structural affidavit, technically that goes to the structural engineer, even though the electrical guy said, yeah, I got the affidavit. So that makes the structural guy responsible. And that's why the electrical guy will make sure he gets everything in place.
Go ahead.
I mean, I don't know that having a civil guy running it is any different, because that guy's just gonna do the exact same thing. Okay, as long as the structural guy gave me the information and said it's right, it's on the structural guy who stamped it.
I have to disagree, Karen. And the reason is that, in my experience as a civil engineer, and I've been project manager on very large recreational facilities. There are very specific requirements for ball field design when it relates to safety for children or who's ever using it. So I understand that the electrical engineer would be responsible how something is built according to the plan, but if the plan is not correct and it gets built according to the plan, the electrical engineer is going to say, well, that's what the plan showed. Who's responsible that the design is accurate, that the electrical work jives with the landscape architectural work for recreational fields? Right, this is the dilemma I have with not having a full-fledged site plan. One aspect is the safety of it, that, you know, when you're looking at a ball field, a pole's not in the wrong place for safety reasons, or a handhole or a electrical box is not located in the outfield of the adjacent field. Or, I don't know, electrical conduit having certain setbacks to chain link fence, or transformers having setbacks to bullpens.
Right, well, that's a standard spec that the electrician would know also.
I'm not convinced of that because of the experience I have. Electrical engineers deal with electrical things. They're not versed. When we did ball field design, we had a landscape architect who was licensed, and his specialty was doing ball field layout. And it's not just, you know.
That's building one, or an existing ball field that now you're just adding an asset to?
It's both. It's both, because you can locate poles. An electrical engineer will say, okay, the pole, go here, and we have the service in the street that's required, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean the pole is a sufficient distance to the fence, or the underground structures where they're being built, are they in the outfield? You know, those types of things. Things have to be in the right place in conjunction for when people use the field. It's not just simply the electrical schematic. And I'm sure the electrical schematic is probably fine and functioning, but is it laid out in conjunction with a ball field that meets regulations and standards for ball field design? You know, there are restrictions on how close things can be to each other. Just like you have a baseline and home plate is a certain distance from first base, well, there's also requirements how things have to be. You can't have a pole in the outfield where someone's not looking and they run into it. You can't have surfaces in the outfield that someone runs across and may slip on or something,
Right,
or trip.
Since these are basically outside of our fence, and as long as we're meeting the distance from the fencing that they need to be,
But who is assuring that? Who is assuring that the design
well, I'll
of...
make sure the electrical engineer checked into that and did that.
Okay, well, I can tell you already, just from the cursory review I did of the plan, that there are features there that wouldn't be acceptable.
All right,
for
so I'll
both
have them relook at it, but that, I don't know, does that mean a full-on civil site plan with a civil engineer or a landscape architect versus the, because we didn't have, this came off of GIS, the plan we have for Mooney, because we don't have we didn't have a site plan. The site plan, again, for Choate, was something that was done, that we basically took a PDF, and the engineer, the electrical engineer, put something on it,
Yeah,
and then
I'm listening.
that was the approval, was of that. So it was okay at Choate. I just want to, if I get the electrical guy and says, hey, this is fine, once we actually have a, you know, because we didn't retake his plan, we took his plan and laid it out schematically on the GIS.
I
We didn't-
understand.
So, but we can have him do it onto an existing plan so that he meets all the standards that you're concerned about, and then stamp it, but it's gonna be an
But
electrical
I'm not
plan.
sure that he knows those standards. In other words, he's stamping the electrical design. He's not stamping, so it gets
This is really up to the
designed.
board at this point.
Well,
So if
and the other side of that
if we
is-
have to have a civil, then it's up to them to figure out what they're gonna do.
Well,
and
that's
how they're
one
gonna do it.
component. The other side of it is like the existing conditions there. There's information like there's some drain lines underneath. things like that.
We just
So
got the
how do
drain
we
plan,
know?
so I have to get that added in onto, same thing though, I have a PDF and I'm gonna combining PDFs, which is what we did here over at Choate versus an actual, because he's not gonna, like, civil person, if they go out and you get,
Well, it can be a landscape architect too, who has experience.
but you're gonna
in-
need, but you're basically asking for a survey. That's what I'm trying to figure out. You're talking about a drain line now. Well, the drain line's on a PDF plan that,
Yeah.
like, we can scan, we'll have a PDF of. So you have a drain line, so now you're not actually surveying in that, like, are you looking for a civil plan surveyed out, stamp, there's a big difference between if I can take a PDF and we can schematically or basically take something that is scaled, put it together and have it stamped, because I can have the electrical guy stamp it, we can probably have a civil guy stamp it, same plan, you've got your electrical stamp, all on one. I live with this, right? Or we could have two separate plans stamped, however you want it. My question is, does it have to be a full-on, brand-new survey of this site with a civil engineer? Because that's what I'm understanding from you, and I'm not sure that that's really what you need.
I think often civil engineers will take existing conditions information from plans that already exist and produce a plan that is probably pretty accurate. It doesn't always mean a full-fledged field survey.
So you don't need, so you're telling me I don't need to get you a full-fledged
No, I'm
survey?
saying that if the information you do have is sufficient to demonstrate what's actually there, so if you're confident and the civil engineer who's going to stamp it, or the landscape architect is confident that the information you're providing from historic information is accurate, and he is comfortable or she is comfortable stamping that, then that would most likely be sufficient, because he's taking on the responsibility that the design is valid and that it's constructible. So you have to have both things. You can have a plan and someone can build it, but doesn't mean the plan is right. So the plan has to be right, and then most likely it'll get built properly.
So you truly don't believe that an electrical engineer knows the setbacks for conduit or anything like that? You don't think that they would, when they do lighting a lot and they're always working in ball fields, that's sufficient knowledge and understanding that they could do that? I mean, you're gonna require it to be a civil person. I need to know exactly what we're getting so that they can get their prices, because someone's gonna have to pay for that, obviously. Like, if it's a civil guy and this, or not, an electrical guy, and this is what he does all the time, right? So he's basically a guy who does, so is that just not good enough? If he's stamping it saying it's meeting the standards, isn't it on him?
Sorry, I just want to interject with a question for a second. Because you've referenced Choate multiple times.
Yeah.
But there was a site plan for your electrical engineer to work off of.
Right.
And we don't have that in this case.
Right.
Do you feel that poses any problem? If you're basically, if I'm understanding your position, it's that
Because I didn't ask him, so I don't have actually I do have one now, because Recreation had gotten one from somebody who had an old plan from, I don't know when it was,
Just
the
got it
fields
today.
were built.
For
So I
for
got
this?
that today, yeah. So I can, like I said, I can scan that through, and I actually have a site plan now that it's old.
Do you know that?
I just got it today. I just got the plan today. She didn't know.
Right, and I found a CD in one of the boxes in our office from Finn School Fields or something like that. It's from 1998 or something.
So it might be from this too. That might be
It
the
was
same one,
Keys
but maybe you
Associates or
could send
something.
that over to me, or
Yeah.
we'd copy it, because
Yeah.
if we use that, that's my so I now have this plan, like I just got it today, like I said. So if I take that and I have him, put it together, the electrical, I just need to know what I need to do. So
If
that
you
you're-
have if you have an engineer who's willing to stamp a plan that is saying it's buildable, that's what I think we're looking for. Someone who is ultimately responsible for the design.
So you're willing to have it be the electrical person?
I can't say for sure, because just looking at the plans, I see an electrical line, and we're not supposed to go technical, running under the buildings. And I'm saying or under the bullpen and under, when I look at the schematic here.
That was because guy in the office just threw that together, and that was in my office.
No,
It
this
was-
is the electrical plan, okay? So this is the electrical
Yeah.
layout, okay?
Okay,
So I'm just concerned because I didn't have a lot of confidence that this, and I don't know this person, and I could be totally wrong,
so
that,
I don't see even a bullpen on there.
exactly. So
Right,
how do
that's
you
the
know?
Electrical plan. That's my point. That was the electrical plan, and then we took that and
Right,
we
and you-
put it into the site plan, but the person who did it, the person in my office who did it, didn't go into great lengths to get it
Right.
exact because he was just trying, okay, is this good enough as a
Yes,
site?
and this is the point I'm speaking. This is why it's so important, because the line that the electrical engineer is showing is running from the transformer up behind the bullpen to this lower light here at the bottom of the outfield. And it's running under the batting cage, the bullpen, and whatever else it's going under. So when I see that, I'm saying there's not a coordination here somehow. There's
Right, 'cause
something
we
missing.
didn't coordinate this, like was done in my office, because you said you needed a site plan, and we said just put that together.
Right, but that's existing. You see, that's existing. The electrical guy was adding the proposed lines which are in conflict with what's existing.
The electrical person didn't put those lines on, that's the thing. Our
Yeah.
Our guy
But you
did
see
that.
what I'm saying, the
Yeah, no,
confusion.
I see what you're saying, but I don't think you're seeing mine. My point is that that was just made because you said you needed a site plan. I was like, well, this at least gives you an idea.
Right, but the
But now,
site,
if you want it exact, and you're okay with using a PDF and not doing a full-on survey, again, does it have to be a full-on survey, brand new, with a site, or are we able to use an existing site plan that I now have, so I don't have to go through using the GIS system, and have the electrical person work with that? Is that
Sorry, but
sufficient?
how does it really fair to ask us to make that decision now, based on nothing? We don't have anything to evaluate to.
Well, I was
answer
under the
that
impression
question.
we were only needed to have a discussion, we never had to go to major site plan, so it's the same idea, that's why we've been trying to work within what we have available for us. I mean, we have the expertise in electrical, we have an expertise of foundation, we have an expertise of the vendor. So I understand, okay, you want to see that the electrical person has the understanding and the expertise to say, no, we're far enough off of the
Is
fence
it-
or whatever it is, it's not in the outfield, it's this and that, we need to make sure that we can still have the helicopter land. I mean, I understand all
there's the
that.
site plan component that's missing, and that's the part that ties it all together. And that's what the site plan does. It
Right.
ties the
So-
structural with the foundation, with the electrical line,
So,
with the
again,
sidewalks, with the existing chain link fence.
If we do it similar to
ties
we
it
did the
together.
last one, which, so then you have an existing, we have an existing plan, and we put on the electrical to it, and the electrical stamps it, because that's what we did last time.
I think that the site plan bylaw indicates that it has to be a professional engineer, land surveyor, landscape architect. I don't think an electrical engineer is necessarily, even ethically, supposed to stamp a site plan unless he is sure
But
that
he's stamping
his.
it as an electrical, but
He's,
that's
he's,
what they did at
when an
Choate.
electrical engineer stamps his electrical plan, he's stamping the electrical portion of it. He's
Okay.
not stamping that
So
there's a
you need
sidewalk that's
so
proper.
we need to have a civil guy stamp a plan for you.
I think that would be the,
Okay.
the best.
I just need to
because
know, but
you're-
it doesn't
you're
necessarily
protecting
have
you-
to be a full-on new survey. I just want to make sure. So it's just, if I have a civil person who will agree that, yep, this plan,
Yeah.
I have enough information.
I think that's the thing.
fine.
I think.
But it doesn't have to be like a full-on new CAD drawing with all the different,
No,
because some of the requirements are like a 1-foot contour or whatever, like, do you need all that?
There are
Because I don't
waivers for
have
those
that.
things. There are waivers for those types of things. It's the idea that the picture fits. In other words, everything will
No,
work
I understand what
together.
you mean.
Yeah.
I just,
Someone
I-
has to be responsible for the overall work. of
Right,
it.
I understand that. My issue is the civil guy is not gonna go back on site again. Electrical guy is still gonna run the project, because that's
I
what the
understand.
contract is.
In my opinion, I have used a culmination of existing information and produced an existing condition plan without doing a field survey because it was recent information, it was accurate. There may have been a field audit that
But-
said, here's a drain line, there it is, you're right. so we
Does
don't
this,
have to do
but does this satisfy Mr. Morris's
I
concern?
can't speak to that, I'm just
So,
saying that.
I understand now that point, but does this speak to Mr. Morris's concern about the fact that the electrical is gonna be running the project?
I think we just, I'm going to try to answer that. We got some, our town planner is a registered professional engineer, which is not a requirement of the job, so we have a real superstar for a town planner. And in this case, we lucked out that in her private consulting days, she actually had quite a bit of experience with these fields, athletic fields. And what she was saying here a little while ago about coordination between not just making the thing work, but making it safe and meeting the standards for playing fields for kids of certain ages. I would think, I mean, that's a concern of mine, and I would think that it would be a concern of the commission, the rec component, but also of the selectmen and all of the citizens in town to make sure that whatever we're doing on these fields is safe for these kids.
Well, and that does
So-
make sense that we have the civil person
so-
look at this,
Well, you're asking,
but if they're not,
you're kind of
running the
asking us
project.
to put the project together, tell you how to put the project together. And what site plan usually consists of is the proponent finds a consultant who's capable of putting the site plan together, putting these different components together. This new component about, and it has me thinking, because my kids played there, and, you know, you've got, for example, the right field for the softball field backs up to the left field for the Babe Ruth field. There's no fence in between. It's a huge distance. You'd have to really crank one, but there's no fence in between. And then when you get over into the Little League field that's near the snack shack, that's fully fenced. But on the other side of that fence, we've seen other teams practicing, whether it's baseball or soccer. So now they're on the side of the fence where the light is, and the transformer, or the handholds. So I'm just picturing, you know, my days there and with my kids and what's there, and putting that together with what we just heard from Karina, that we really do need somebody to be able to make sure that the lighting works for the whole system of fields. Because what's on one side of the fence might be safe, but depending on the use on the other side of the fence, it might not be.
okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So then, gets back to, then what about at Trotter? And tennis, same thing? It's just, I just want to make sure, because I want it to come back, like, we want to go to the major site plan and have everything.
Right.
And answer the questions and just be done. If we have to go to major, then that's, but we need it very clear, because it hasn't been very clear still, like, the electrical, it seems like nobody thinks an electrical is the right person to make sure that it's all installed correctly. And I still believe that with the way affidavits work, that's the right, that works out the best as long as they build it to plan. And, I mean, it makes sense, fine. We have a civil guy stamp a plan that says this is all safe, but I would assume that that's the same thing we would need at Trotter. Just like that, and we don't need to have any, I don't expect the civil guy over at Trotter to be watching the work, it still, again, would be the electrical.
Go ahead, Mr. Jinks.
Do you foresee any requirement to have plans recorded?
Recorded
At
for,
the registry?
no.
Okay, because if you ever need the recorded plan, you're gonna have to have a surveyor or a civil engineer. And in rare circumstances, someone else. From the engineering standpoint, their Board of Registration allows an engineer to supervise and in some cases even stamp plans in a different discipline. But it's a well, let me back up and tell you, I am one revision of the regulations, the engineering regulations, away from my time on that board. So they may have changed some of this. But it would be fine to have the electrical engineer manage that project.
I think we agree, we should have a civil guy make that other plan. That
Yeah,
makes sense,
it
that's
would be
fine.
better
Yeah,
from the standpoint of civil engineering is a much broader discipline. Civil engineering covers a ton of stuff. For instance, we don't license traffic engineers anymore. That's a discipline under civil engineering. There are several others. They've cut the number of disciplines way down. So if the engineer is comfortable and can certify to you as the project owner, and it sounds like you are the owner.
yeah, DPW technically owns fields.
If the engineer can certify to you that he or she has the requisite engineering experience to do all of those pieces, from the engineering standpoint, that's all right. They allow that. From a liability standpoint, it may be different. Because if you choose an electrical engineer to manage or even end up designing some of a structural piece, even if it's a lamp standard, and something happens, there may be a liability issue there.
Right.
So,
I mean, the structural design has all been through structural
I
engineer.
just use it as
but
an
yeah.
example. It seems to me it makes sense if you can afford to do it, because money's always the issue,
This is.
to get a civil engineer to be the final engineer on the project. Civil engineers can do a lot of different disciplines.
But Phil, I think you're right there, and adding to that would be the civil engineer who has consulting experience in athletic fields.
Yes and no. Yes, from the standpoint that adds that extra expertise. No, from the standpoint that tends to become a specialty and costs more, and they're trying to keep the costs down. And you have to kind of weigh that off with, is this a super complicated design for a playground, or is this a fairly standard design that a lot of people have done? I don't know the answer in this case.
I think based on what the town planner was telling us earlier, it should be a concern of ours to make sure that, again, that the lighting and the locations work for the whole system of fields, not just for individual fields on their own. And
Well,
if
there'd be
it
an
costs more
obvious
money,
advantage to that.
if it costs more money, you know, who among us would say, you know, well, we don't need that, and then
We are only lighting one field.
then there's a problem.
I-
Right, but again, the lights for,
We were only planning on
the lights for one field are placed on the other side of the fence in another field.
No, I understand that, it's just that we were sorry. That's sort of, that wasn't my point. My point was, I just want to make sure, we are only lighting one field, but yes, I understand your point of that, the outfields, they don't quite cross, but they're not necessarily segregated. So I understand that point, I just want to make sure you didn't think that we were lighting anything more than one baseball field, but we are lighting all the tennis courts.
Right, but we've also had experience where we light one field or we do one thing and then a couple years later it's the next field or the next thing and it grows. So you just want to make sure that we start off on the right foot. Phil, I interrupted you.
No, that's true.
So, without having seen the plan that I guess was just discovered today or received today, I think we'd like to say yes. Karen, you were asking, is that sufficient? And I think we'd like to say yes, but we haven't seen the plan. And I'm not sure if it's appropriate for, again, for you or anyone to be asking the planning board to put the pieces together for your site plan. We can advise, but you can't expect us to put the package together.
I don't believe anybody's asking you to put the package together as much as make sure that we don't spend town funds on something that then you say, no, that's not what we wanted something different. We need to be very careful with how we spend our money too. So I just want to make sure that we don't spend it on something and then you say, no, it should have been this. And then you kind of double spend versus just making sure you're kind of getting what you're requiring for the best cost we can. That's all I'm trying to make sure we do.
Sounds like what we just went through with the public safety building. The consultant was probably talking to the town planner every day in the early stages of that design.
I mean, we'll get that copy to you right away that we just received.
Mr. Jenks.
I'll just point out too that I don't think we have been sticklers on every single regulation and every little piece. We waive requirements that we're allowed to waive. So if you follow the rules and you come in and say, but do we really have to put a garden up on top of the bullpen? I think we're going to say no for you, so. Not you. There's your problem.
Well, I think as I mentioned before, we're here in the spirit of cooperation in order to get the project done. And we've heard what you have to say in that regard. We have some additional information we'll provide to you as soon as you can make a copy on it. It'll be shortly. And
I'll go back to the memos that the town planner has sent with those detailed comments. Mrs. Luttrell.
Yeah, on that point, I just wanted to reiterate, the site plan is exactly what is to be built. And so everything that's going to be built needs to be on that site plan. I know that the ZBA, in their conditions, had some landscaping requirements at the tennis court, so those need to show up on the site plan also.
any more question?
I
I
think
just
it's
asked the town planner if she was comfortable with the discussion to this point, so now she's going to respond.
Well, I think that we're more on the same page with the understanding that the plan has to it has several components, and all these components work together, and it's the site plan that pulls all those components together. It's like the GC of the plans. You have your electrical, you have your structural, and it's the site plan that shows this all works with the fencing that's there, it all works with the existing conditions that are there, whether it's underground drainage or other underground utilities, other electrical lines. It's just making sure that things are put in the right place so that it's safe and buildable and that it'll work. Not that after it's done and after it's built, we're back here and we say, oh, wow, that doesn't work like that because the fences are, we have to now move the shed or the bullpen. All those things get vetted in the site plan process so that you don't have to spend money later. A little money up front is worth a whole lot that you pay at the end during construction. You know, it's the costs are heavy at the end when you don't have a plan that has vetted everything as best as it can. Because it's much more expensive to have a change order. It's much more expensive to rectify a major problem. If you do it up front, you tend to save costs. A little bit of planning up front saves it in the long run, I've found, so.
So, we have this set of plans that were distributed last week. What's the status with these? Who has the plan? Whose court is the ball in?
Well, this was the information that you have today was submitted as a discussion item materials. If you need these back, we can take them back so you don't have to reproduce them. That's fine, I have everything. We can get them back to you if that's not a problem for the board.
We just want to make sure that when we leave here, Mr. Nixon, I couldn't agree with you more, that we're all on the same team.
Exactly.
We're all working for the town, and we're all getting paid well.
I
But-
appreciate the supplement to my retirement.
Yeah, right. So, I just want to make sure that when we leave here tonight, that we know who has what actions. And it would appear that the action is back in your court. However, the town planner remains fully available to you for questions, as she is for any other proponent, that would come in for a site plan.
Right.
Yes, Bonnie, you know.
First, I want to thank is this on?
Yes.
I want to thank the board for giving Recreation some direction here, but I'm kind of confused. Are you still asking for a public hearing for the residents? I mean, that was my
Yes.
understanding in the process that we went through to get to where we are.
What we talked about tonight was what they need to do to put together a site plan application that's complete. Once it's determined to be complete, we launch on a public hearing notice to the public for the hearing to be in what is it, two consecutive weeks of notices, and then we launch on the public hearing.
All right, I appreciate you restating that for the public that might be watching this evening, because sometimes it gets a little confusion. There's some confusion. And I think we're very lucky as a community to have Karina with her expertise, and I think we should be using it. It is adjacent to a public school as well, and I sat in on many hearings with the rec department. I'm speaking for myself, a resident of 179 Middle Road. I voted for this. The funding was approved at town meeting, but I think there still is some apprehension from the residents in the area who have been very, very supportive of the recreation programs, and I think we want to keep it that way. So I'm glad there'll be a public hearing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
You will.
Later?
Yeah, I'll get them all together and put them back in a box for you, so you can have them all together.
You want all of them? Yeah. I think we're gonna need them. You didn't scribble on it, did you? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is the master plan update. I'll ask the town planner to give us the master plan update now or in 2 minutes. She's ready.
All right, since the last meeting, we've had several members appointed at the last meeting, were also sworn in as part of the master plan committee. And what we've also done is MAPC has a technical assistance program that was open for applications for towns looking to receive assistance for master plan or any type of planning projects or any projects related to planning in town. So the planning department drafted an application response and submitted it in time for the January 23rd MAPC meeting. Unfortunately, that meeting was rescheduled to this week, but we did get the application in, and we're in correspondence with them, hoping that they will accept our application and take on working with Southborough to help guide the master plan committee for the master plan update, whatever level of effort that may be. So on the screen, you'll see our MAPC submittal. They requested a 2-page draft with certain categories that they wanted explained and a narrative about what we're proposing for the town. And basically, it's the major site plan. And we're looking to MAPC to hopefully give us the guidance on A, how to approach the master plan update, what are the best ways to run public meetings, what is the best guidance for the master plan committee as far as how they operate within themselves. Do they each have a category, or does everybody talk about everything? So we're going to look for guidance from them from that. So I will be following up with them this week in hopes that we are in the queue to get that technical assistance. So that's all I have on the update. I do have a tracking spreadsheet that currently shows the master plan committee, and if you look, all the names that are in black are in, appointed, and sworn in. This evening we have 5 people who are listed in red on the list who are hopefully going to be appointed this evening by the planning board, and then they'll have 15 days to get sworn in. And then you'll notice there are names in blue. These are pending potential members. For example, Recreation Commission, they've designated David Nixon, who was here this evening speaking for the Ballfield project, but they didn't have a chance to vote to recommend him. So they'll do that at the next meeting. The school committee, I spoke with the chair of the committee, Mr. Desmond, and he put the information to Jessica Devine, who's on the committee, who's interested. She just had a few questions on when the meetings will be and the frequency, and I was able to give her some general guidance until we get some consulting guidance, whether it's MAPC or other. Then we have a request from the library. The director there asked if perhaps someone from the library could be a member as member at large, and if not, he would like to be an ex officio. So I told him that that the planning board would have a chance to talk about, think about that this evening, and I'd get back to him. And then we have another member at large who verbally told me that she was going to commit to the committee if she was appointed, Karen Shimkus. She's out of town and will be giving me an official email or something that says I would like to be on the committee. So out of the 22 slots, we potentially have 1, 2, 3, 4 openings. The names in blue are pending. The names in red are supposed to be appointed this evening. So we made some progress on membership.
Thank you. Mr. Mills.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we appoint from the Historical Commission Rebecca Dean Rhodes, from the Conservation Commission Judith Watson, from Open Space Preservation Karen, how do you say that?
Svikovich.
From Shopsy Thomas
Marcoulier.
Marcoulier, and from ADA William Sines to the Master Plan Committee.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion?
So I have a discussion question. Did we, as the planning board, have any recommendation to make as far as who's going to chair the master plan committee? Or do they self-appoint once those meetings get underway?
They self-appoint, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you. Yes, I know you're on it. I was asking who's going to chair the whole committee.
You're lucky you almost got put on it.
Any more discussion? Any more discussion? All in favor? Okay, we got those 5 appointed or reappointed. And then your question about the library rep, is yes an appropriate answer for both parts of the question?
Yes. He will be happy to hear that.
Either as a ex officio or as a at-large?
Yes, if he has somebody who may be interested in as a member at large, and if not, he must not live in town, the director.
I would not have an issue with either one.
Phil?
Are you asking me? Sorry.
Jesse?
Sorry, do I have an issue with?
Library.
I do not have an issue with that.
And Mrs. Luttrell.
It's fine.
So you got your answer on that one.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that the town planner and I discussed last week was, we have a parallel track going here. We're trying to fill up this committee, so, and it's taking, in my opinion, way too long. But we're making good progress. And so, and then as far as getting the consultant, we're kind of on the threshold of that. So those are the parallel tracks. And we were wondering if we should, if there's enough members and we can put together a first meeting, do we do it without the consultant, if the consultant's not on board yet? Or do we wait for the consultant to be at meeting number 1? And I guess we need a consultant to tell us it's a bad idea to have a meeting without the consultant, or a consultant to say that's a recipe for disaster if we're at the first meeting, or so. Opinions, Mr. Mills?
I would be inclined to wait until we have the consultant so we could be focused and have a clear agenda for what we wanted to address. And if we do get brought into the MAPC piece, then, we should have a clear direction. But I would not be, I think it would be best to wait for the consultant.
Who is selecting the consultant, and what is the process?
I attended a MAPC MWRC meeting a couple weeks ago, and Karen Edelman, who's the coordinating person for MWRC for MAPC, at the end of the meeting I was telling her about the master plan and if they provided any services. And she said, yes, we do. As a matter of fact, if you go with MAPC, you don't have to procure because they're a nonprofit, kind of quasi-state agency, I think, nonprofit. So she said, let me put you in touch with the right people. So she gave us Mark Rassicott's name, who heads up this section, and he sent us a invitation to respond to getting this technical assistance, which we drafted up immediately, and we got it in time for the meeting. That's our prime option. That's option number one. We hope that happens. We got the response in fast and early. We're showing some money towards it. If that doesn't happen, grant money. If that doesn't happen, I've reached out to VHB and to who did our prior master plan in 2008, and I also reached out to BSC Group, who was referred through the Mass Planners email forum, having done updates for other towns, and I would be looking for a third consultant if we need to take that route.
So the first choice is MAPC,
Yes.
and would they identify an individual, or would it be that organization and we might get different people at different times?
I'm going to find that out with some correspondence this week as I follow up with them. What they do is the grant is a money equivalent of hours that they allocate to the town to assist them. And there probably are a couple levels. There's probably a senior person who oversees medium range staff, and then probably some technician levels who would do some of the more of the grunt work, so to speak. But there is most likely like a project manager who oversees a couple people. But I'll find that out as I talk to them this week.
We actually, very good question, Phil, because Karina and I talked about that as far as would the consultant be a single person for the whole process, or as the master plan went into the different components like traffic, if we'd have a traffic master plan person that they have, or if we talk about public safety or roads, if we have different people. So that's probably one of the reasons why we don't want to launch without the consultant. But I also want to make sure, and I think it's kind of the reverse of the earlier question, which is we have, what's the total number, what's the total number here? Is it 22. If we have 20 people or 19 people, we're not going to wait to get to 22. We have enough to get started. That's the way I feel. And we won't wait, because we want to keep this moving. But the consultant, MAPC said it's like a 2-year process, right?
Yeah, that's correct, because they allocate a certain amount of funds each year. So it may be like 30, 25,000, 30,000, and then they know they have to go to the next phase so that they can offer it again in the next. And currently they're helping, they've already started in prior years helping 3 other communities with master plans.
Do you know which communities?
Yes, it's Box.
Have you talked to them?
I haven't yet.
See how
This all
that's
just
going?
happened the last week, so I think it's Duxbury, Boxborough, and there's one other one. I have it written down.
Might be worth a phone call.
Yes. Northborough, by the way, is currently doing a master plan. Using VHB, yes. And VHB also submitted a proposal to the town of Hudson. I don't know where that ended up, who they selected, but they used the town of Southborough as a example master plan. And one other thing I just want to say, the fellow who works, Ralph Wilmer, who works at MAPC right now, who is doing the selection of whose master plan to work on, was actually at VHB back in 2008 and had worked on the Southborough master plan. And the Southborough master plan won an award from the Massachusetts Planning Directors chapter in 2009, which I didn't know until Mark Rassicott actually told me that on the phone the other day. So I thought that was an interesting connection.
How much did we win?
Oh, I think it was just a certificate. Freddie's up there.
Yeah. So we got an award for a great master plan. Do they ever follow up to see if anybody follows the plan? Be nice to get an award on that. Yes.
To be determined.
Hi, Freddie Gillespie. I worked with Jennifer Burney to help find, on a time crunch, a consultant for your housing plan that the town did. And they ended up going with Jennifer Burney. Jennifer Burney was the town planner. Jennifer Goldson. And I participated in that and had found her to be very, not just, a good planner, but energetic, you know those charrettes they have, and everyone's like, oh, not again, but it was really, everyone got engaged and involved. I don't know if you were at those, Donnie, but she's done master plans. I just looked at her website, so you might want to consider her for your third person. She did Concord, North Andover, Sharon, a few other towns, so she'd come well referenced when we got her for the housing plan, but the only problem with her could be that she's very popular or, well-respected, and you'd want to contact her sooner rather than later to see if she's even available. But if you're looking for a third, if you don't get the MAPC, she's already, worked in the town, so.
Thank you.
I can send you her contact info.
Yes, Sam.
Quick comment. Sam Stivers, already a member of the Plan Committee. I have a little different view from Mr. Mills, I guess, and I'm sensitive to your point, Mr. Morris, about why don't we get this thing going. I mean, I spent decades as a consultant, and I think they're highly overrated, as a matter of fact. I think that this is just sort of a logical process. I think the committee ought to be driving the process and not sit around and wait for the consultant to tell them what to do. So I don't see any problem with actually starting with whoever is available now and laying out what our expectations are for the process and having some ideas on the table when the consultant comes in, so we can actually have a starting point at least understand where the committee is, if they're all over the map in terms of what needs to be done. Useful to know that sooner rather than later. I participated in the previous master plan that was coordinated by VHB. I found them very unimpressive. My sense was they were grinding away to wind up billable hours, basically. And the product was delivered, but I thought it was, again, too much effort and time for the result that was produced. So and I realize it's very individual sensitive. So VHB's got dozens of people, maybe there are better people there. To me, you look at the specific consultant versus the firm. So again, I would vote for getting started on this and seeing what we can come up with to guide the consultant versus being led by the consultant. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the part about being committee-driven is very important. Okay, anything else on that? If not, we'll go on to planners report.
Quickly, because we have meeting minutes. Just quickly, because we have meeting minutes that we're happy about. Planners report, we've posted on the town website, thanks to Vanessa Hale posting it, the opening for business administrator in the planning department. So if anybody's interested, or if you know anybody you could refer, that would be very helpful. There's a potential upcoming project for a New England Sports Center for Women, maybe at the Dell EMC property. There's been some talks amongst the town staff about that. Let's see.
Huge, by the way.
Yes, very big project. Stadium that seats, I think, 13,000 people. That would be a really tremendous thing. I mentioned to Tim Litt prior to the meeting, he has occasionally asked about the Complete Streets program. I was talking to Karen Galligan at the DPW, who's working on initiatives including Complete Streets, so that's kind of under her jurisdiction, and she's working on that. The 5G small cell, there's an update. The Board of Selectmen and the Municipal Technology Committee are working with an attorney that was recommended by the town's cable attorney to draft a policy at this point as opposed to bylaw language, per the recommendation of the attorney they're working with. I had a question from Mimi during the week, the process for construction phase of site plans projects. With subdivisions, we go through standard kind of procedure. Covenant gets in place. We engage Fuss and O'Neill to do inspections because the roadway will become public in most cases, even when it's private, to protect the town's interests. But for site plan, it's not a very clear process, so we were wondering what the history was, if it's required. Should we engage inspections for site plans? But Mimi had some questions on that.
Well, just what brought that up was East Main Street is a flex development that has open space. And just from past experience, it's helpful to make sure that the open space remains untouched throughout the development.
You mean like 28 Boston Road, right? Is that what we were talking about?
Yeah, what did I say?
East Main.
Boston Road, yeah. So that was what I was wondering, how we can assure that the open space remains untouched as required in the permit. But that was also a subdivision approval, because received subdivision approval also.
It received, it was a flexible development and a major site plan.
Right, and subdivision.
Was there a subdivision there? Okay. All right. So just food for thought, if maybe if you could think about it, we could talk about it more at the next planning board meeting if we have a chance to. I'll see if I can find some history on it, if anybody else any of the members have history on how to proceed, what worked and what didn't.
Right, I was just looking for a process to know how these things are followed up on. And it seems that there's one for subdivision, and I was wondering how it worked for site plan.
And that's what I have for the planner's report.
Mr. Mills?
Make a motion, we approve the minutes for July 23rd, 2018.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion?
I have one. Line 37, it says, Mr. Mills, I think it should be stated there are dumpsters on the railroad, or near the railroad space. The rest of that, I don't recall that it needed to be investigated. It was just, I was stating that there were dumpsters there. Yeah, because it had to do with traffic needing to get in there to get how the dumpsters were gonna get emptied. That was it.
Any other questions, comments? All in favor? Okay. Mr. Mills?
Make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes from July 30th, 2018.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Approved.
Make a motion, we approve the meeting minutes from August 7th, 2018, as written.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? 5-0. Excellent. Great job, Kate.
Thanks. Yes. Fabulous. And we'd have had more today. I just didn't get a chance to give it a final once-over.
Mr. Chairman, make a motion, we all cheer for the Patriots on February 3rd.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? I heard that changing the name of the Super Bowl to the Patriots Invitational.
I don't think we can put that motion on the floor. It would stand, but I would.
We don't have that authority, but your motion, we do have that authority. Any more discussion? All in favor? Mr. Mills?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? We're adjourned.